It's a hot summer day in Saskatoon, and a bunch of 14, 15-year-old theater geeks are taking a break from theater camp, sitting around outside the old Persephone Theater, the one that used to be a theater and was reclaimed for different gods. And we're talking about books. And somehow or another, the Vampire Chronicles come up because it's 1994 and we're a bunch of theater nerds. And somehow I get talking about how the different narrative voices of the books narrated by Louis and the books narrated by Lestat, and talking about how they suit the different characters, and one is all slow and descriptive and poetic and a bit boring, and the other is all passion and action. And it was my first time talking about media analysis for fun. And I didn't even know it, but that was the first time that I did that. And I was thinking about that story last night when I heard that Anne Rice had died. There are two authors that I think of when I think of my adolescence. One is Douglas Adams and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the other is Anne Rice and The Vampire Chronicles. And my memories of these books are so strong, so clear, that I physically remember the places that I was when I read the books. I used to get the hardcovers every year for Christmas for a number of years. And I could feel a hardcover book in my hand sitting in the airport as I would go back and forth to boarding school. Or sitting in my dorm room behind some curtains with a flashlight in the middle of the night, just kind of devouring these books that just meant so much to me. I was a weird, lonely kid. I didn't know why I was so weird. I didn't have words for it. The word that I used was freak. I knew I was different from everyone else, but I didn't, we didn't really talk about ADHD as being a thing that girls could have. And race was a forbidden topic in our house, so I couldn't talk or think about my mixed race identity. And as to queerness and bisexuality, I mean, the only time people talked about bisexuals in the 90s that I remembered was mostly connected to AIDS and this image of these greedy monsters. That's not something I could think about in terms of myself. So I knew I was weird. I knew I was a freak, but I had no words for why I didn't fit. And then I had these books with these characters who didn't think like everyone else, and didn't look like everyone else, and, and didn't love like everybody else. They loved who they loved, and they didn't make judgments about it. They made family where they chose. And their, different way their mind worked was a gift to them. And it was a place that I could not feel so alone. Because that's when I had no words to think about my identity. All I had was this sense of loneliness and outsiderness, and then I had the books, and I wasn't so alone. And then I found that other people felt the same way. And I found that other people loved these books and loved these books for the same reason, and we could talk about them. like that summer day and those kids at that theater camp, like some of them became the most profound friendships of my youth. And even though we've pretty much lost touch now, they're still a part of me. And it was the first time that I had people. And I'll tell you another story with some of those friends that involves Anne Rice's books. So one day, in a bookstore, I found books that were written by Anne Rice under a different name. And I thought, oh, this is my favorite author. I must get these books. Well, they were eye-opening, to say the least, because the books I'm talking about were her Sleeping Beauty series, called The Claiming of Sleeping Beauty, which were erotica. And not just erotica, but actually quite explicit BDSM erotica. And 16-year-old me didn't know any better. Hey, in those days, we were all more naive. The internet was the thing that squeaked and squawked, and the only computer was in my parents' kitchen, so I didn't know any better. So I took them to school and shared them with my friends, and it was a bit enlightening for all of us. We sort of flicked through the pages and read out passages to each other in the lunchroom. which was bad enough. But I also had it with me in math class once and finished my test. So I started reading my book, and my teacher came over and was going to make fun of me for reading a romance novel. So he picked it up and he read it. And he was one of those very stodgy, blowhard Christian-y types. And so he's reading it, thankfully not aloud, and I remember his eyebrows just kind of going up and up and up, and as if they were going to just take off of his forehead. And then he put the book back down on my desk and went, okay, and walked away. I remember looking at my friend and being like, that happened. It's a bit of a non sequitur, but yes, Anne Rice had a number of different books that featured in my life. I did move on from Anne Rice's books. I think Blackwood Farm was the last one that I read. I was in my 20s by that point. I was watching Buffy already. And I was starting to read more Neil Gaiman and other authors. And I was in university the first time. And it just, I just moved on. But I remember those books and how they shaped so much of that period of my life. I remember a different conversation with some of the same friends where I remember saying that I thought that someday these books would be studied academically. Like literature. It would be a thing that we studied. Well, in the last couple years, as I've been studying monster theories as part of media studies and queer theory, these books have come up. I have had them be readings academically. And we read them not as the perfect texts that my teenage self thought that they were, but as complicated texts. Flawed, but nonetheless speaking to something important about the time and the place, the culture, queerness in its place. Important texts still. And I think, looking back, that's also what they were to me. Complicated texts that nonetheless had something that I needed, spoke to something that I needed in that difficult time, in that difficult age, as I tried to find words and find my identity. I needed something that those books gave me. I think a lot of us did. And that's what I'm thinking about today as I think about Anne Rice and her legacy. Thank you for your stories. They made a lonely girl feel less alone. And that's a beautiful thing for stories to do.